Thank you, everybody, for joining us as we do a deep dive into social learning, starting with the social learning theory. We'll give you an overview, and then we'll have an expert panel. I'm so happy to introduce you to our two panelists. So let's start there. I'm Jess Corinne, Head of Services here at Learnfully. I started my educational career as a classroom teacher. I was a K-1 classroom teacher. So excited to dive into the classroom, quickly realizing that I felt ill-equipped to serve neurodivergent learners in the classroom. And so I joined forces with Linda Mood-Bell and spent the next 12 years really refining the art of multisensory evidence-based implementation. I was with them for quite some time, as I said, 12 years, and then I started having more and more kids. Now I have 4, 3 of whom are neurodivergent, and I needed a little more flexibility. So I opened up my private practice and spread my wings programmatically. I received training in Orton Gillingham, Wilson Reading System, social thinking, step up to writing, making math real, so that I could truly feel like in my practice I was differentiating and personalizing not only my recommendations, but my instructional implementation and my coaching to local schools and other professional organizations. And that's what brought me to Learnfully. At Learnfully, I oversee the instructional implementation. I oversee our assessment process and ensure that we meet all of our learners' needs with fidelity. I'm so excited to be here. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce you to Sam. Sam, if you'd like to introduce yourself, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Jess. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Young. I'm the director of Young Scholars Academy. So we're a virtual enrichment program for twice exceptional and neurodivergent kids. And the idea is to take all of the learning, all the strength-based focus, all of the good feels, the positive psychology, and all the things that often aren't happening in schools, and create a virtual space where students can come together the world over and be entrenched in really positive thinking, strength-based, talent-focused development, and be with one another, because we know that they need one another and they're often isolated. So that's a little bit about me. I could say a lot, but I won't. So
that's brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much for being here. We're grateful for your input. Look forward to hearing more from you. And then Dr. Sheila Murphy is with us again today. If you don't mind doing a quick intro, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. So I am Sheila Murphy. I have 3 boys who all of which struggled in school in multiple ways. And so when I was raising them as a stay-at-home mom, I found myself actually teaching them how to learn and thought, this is something I'd be really interested in doing and long-term, because I felt very strongly that, somebody needs to advocate for the kiddos that don't have parents that can afford extra support for their kiddos. And who was teaching the teachers how to teach these kids? I felt like they didn't have the skill set. So I became very passionate in this cause, went back to school, got my teaching credential, 2 master's degrees, and my doctorates all within a decade, to ensure that this is the calling and work that I do for the rest of my days. So that is how I ended up where I am here, supporting Learnfully as a consultant and ed specialist with helping families, helping students in their learning journeys.
Love it. Thank you so much, Sheila. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So we always like to start with why, and Learnfully's why is really our core values and mission. So these are the pillars of our organization. We believe that every child has a capability to learn and fully needs and deserves the ability to not just reach, but also realize their full potential. And we do that in a multiplicity of ways. We incorporate interests, we bolster strengths, and then we target areas of need to ensure that our learner feels supported, yes, but also seen and heard. Learnfully is a platform made of educational specialists near and far. We start with a learner assessment to really pinpoint where the breakdown is happening. We also take into consideration all information that was previously shared with us. And then we continue to monitor the progress over time to ensure that our learners are not only matched appropriately to the educational specialist who has certification and training to match their needs, but also that they are continuing to receive reinforcement between sessions and maintain that momentum and the stamina all along the way. So we provide our parents with coaching and consulting services. We really look at the whole team. We call it the ecosystem of support to ensure that the learner continues to be the center of our model, but that we're supporting the rings that surround said learner through consistent, repetitious, multisensory, evidence-based methodologies. Let's go ahead and talk about social learning. So in that context, typically our students in educational therapy and executive functioning receive one-on-one support or two-on-one support, but we see great value in social reciprocity and social emotional learning development in a group format. So we wanted to ensure that everyone also understood the purpose, the value, the research that supports social learning. I studied psychology in school. I was totally a psychology nerd. I loved it. And so one of my favorite theories that I learned was Albert Bandura's social learning, which then evolved to social cognition theory. And so the kind of key points of that theory, I want to make this as simple as possible, but the key points is that learners can learn in their environment. They learn through observation. They learn through the cognitive process of that information. Then they observe whether or not a behavior or an action was reinforced, either positively or negatively. And then they make a decision whether or not to imitate that. Most of this trajectory, this flow, is innate by the time they're in school. So they don't necessarily fully realize that they're doing it. But this shows the great opportunity that we have to shape a learner's social, emotional, and cognitive development through their social environment. So making sure that they have peers they can relate to, that content is shared in a way that is interest and strength-based, that they have professionals surrounding them that help model and mentor the right, not just overt behaviors, but cognitive processes, validate their way of thinking, reinforce those desired behaviors that will lead that personal learner to their own level of success is extremely important. Of course, there are other variables that impact a learner's success other than their social environment, such as their biological state. So their ability, you witnessed this at the beginning of our webinar, their ability to self-regulate, their health habits, their nutritional patterns, their sleep habits, all impact their ability to fully take advantage and optimize that social environment. And then also their cognitive abilities. So we want to secure a learner's sensory cognitive foundation so that they can stand upon it when it does come time to process the social environment around them, process the peers in their cohort or group, in their classroom, in their community as a whole, and then be able to monitor what drives them. That passion, that reinforcement, that motivation that then causes that behavior to repeat itself in the right direction. So we learn by doing, and we learn by surrounding ourselves with others that really reinforce or bolster those desired patterns, whether it be how to strike mindfulness practice, how to be able to then, even just simple things as executive functioning would say, just put your stuff away, right? How to organize your stuff, how to make sure that you're clear of visual and auditory distractions, things like that. We are constantly modeling for learners, but learners are also modeling for one another when they're in a group setting. So the top takeaways of this theory, Bandura's theory, is that people can and do learn, right, by observing others in their space, whether it be other learners, adults, and the like. And that our biology, our cognition, both of those factors impact our ability to interact with the environment or the social sphere around us. And again, learning can change, behavior can change. It's not a guarantee that it will just because it's been modeled or observed. I think the trigger, right, the security is if they feel motivated to mimic that behavior that they observed, if they see the reward was positive and they want to also feel that dopamine kick that they get from being productive or being reinforced in that environment, it's also important. So yes, we can set our learners up for success by surrounding them with social peers and adults who model the right behavior, but they also have to have the biological, cognitive, and motivational forces in place in order to fully take advantage of those social pieces. Okay, so what are these key results of social learning theory or the social cognitive theory? It clearly encourages positive relationships because our brain responds and wants to repeat positively reinforced behaviors. So this can encourage discussion, This can encourage social initiative, taking that leap, taking that risk to interact with their peers when they face a level of anxiety. It can ensure, or at least encourage, a learner to be more socially inept, socially aware of their surroundings, and it motivates them to lean into discomfort in those social moments to the point where it reinforces their ability to continue to do that in the future. Those reinforcements, as I said, help to reproduce the behavior. So if a negative reinforcement comes in and something is taken away from a learner, then they learn from that as well. They won't necessarily repeat their peers' behavior because they don't want that said thing taken away from them. But the same goes for positive reinforcement, right? If they see one of their peers get a high five in a group format, I don't know, fist bump if we still do that. If they get a token or some kind of praise for doing well in a group climate, in a group environment, they might then be motivated and reinforced to dive in a little bit more and share their thoughts. And then, of course, we want to make sure our learners are engaged so they can optimize all of the learnings. And some results of this theory suggest that when they're around like-spirited, like-minded peers, when they feel welcomed, when they feel seen and heard, they're a little more relaxed. It releases parts of that stress fog that I talked about earlier in regards to executive functioning, and they can be more engaged, then thus feel more successful and really reap the benefits the environment has to offer in this social realm. I know that's a lot. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat if you'd like. Of course, we're here for you. And if we don't answer them, we're happy to circle back and answer them at another point. So let's go ahead and dive in. So that was kind of setting the climate, right? We learn, we observe, we're reinforced. As long as that foundation is nice and secure, we can step upon it and feel confident and successful. So let's hear from our panelists. I'm so excited to learn more from you. Let's start with Sam. So what is your experience? And this could be in your current role in life. What's your experience with social learning in general? How do you utilize it?
Yeah, I was thinking back to Bandura, by the way, like the Bobo doll experiment. I remember learning.
Yes.
I think social is everything, and I think that often we flip the script. We have this strong focus on academics. We want our students to be able to do this and the executive function skills, but we know that at the end of the day, so human beings are. One of my guests on one of my shows said this: we're social creatures who think, not like thinking creatures who socialize, right? Like we're emotional and we're social. So I have ADHD, and I've always been rather abstract. And the best learning, the most meaningful learning, lessons I remember from kindergarten through high school were always social experiences. It was a debate or some discourse, a Socratic seminar, team building, something like that. So when I think about like staying power, that's something that is really important to me, and it's really baked into everything that we do at Young Scholars Academy.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you for dropping the Socratic questioning. Be still my heart. That was awesome. All right, let's turn it to Sheila. Sheila, what is your experience with social learning?
My experience is when I did get into teaching, I worked at a 90-90-90 school. So 90% English language learners and low socioeconomics. So what was really important was allowing a lot of time for conversation. And the interesting thing about that is that you develop each and every lesson in such a way that it's extremely social, because you want that interaction, you want the dialogue, you want the practice in language. And so in doing that, some of the resources that we used were called thinking maps. And thinking maps, when they're created, can be done, in large posters. And I just will never forget watching these kids engaging in some learning that was so social. At one point, I heard one little kiddo in first grade tell his friend, "I can't believe our teacher lets us play like this all day, and we don't even do any learning while we're here." Funny thing is, a first grader is writing the word echolocation to describe a bat. And I'm thinking, you're a first grader knowing the definition of echolocation, saying to your friend, "I can't believe we don't even have to learn in this classroom all day." And I just remember feeling such pride in that moment, because I realized that the social aspect of this learning, and the rich dialogue that was going on was creating so many connections in their mind, um, and taking down that effective filter such that they felt free to play and practice and engage in learning at such a high level. So
Love that.
kind of one of my
Yeah.
favorite stories that
It's so important how much we learn through play. And I know we've done a few webinars and blogs on that. So I thank you for bringing that up. So Sam, we're going to turn the mic back to you. I'm curious to hear why and how you incorporate social learning in your role today. Why is it so important for Young Scholars Academy?
Yeah, and I love Sheila's example, because I think a lot of our students, if you can get them to like think that they're tricking you, like that they're like pulling the wool over your eyes, or they're gaming the system, like that's usually when like the best learning happens, because it's authentic. To answer your question, Jess, social learning, I say that there's the salt and pepper. I always say, like, a meaningful learning. One is having for neurodivergent students. So I work mainly with twice exceptional students, and for people who don't know what that means, it means a student who sort of straddles the bell curve. Picture someone who has like exceptional strength areas. So they have kind of one foot in the classically gifted area, and then they also simultaneously have a foot in the exceptional learning challenge or learning difference area. So they're sort of always both of those things. I say that the salt and the pepper of the work that we do is having neurodivergent or twice exceptional mentors, right? People that they can kind of look up to, and then neurodivergent and twice exceptional peers, people who they can look over to, right? So a lot of our students might feel marooned or isolated or misunderstood, and they can really start those negative thoughts that can prevent them from blossoming, from self-actualizing. And as you said, there's the sort of foundational part of the pyramid is like affect, right? How do they feel? How do they think about themselves? When they can be in an environment of students who are like them, who get them, who have a similar sense of humor and can empower them, all of a sudden they don't feel like weird or outcasted or there's anything wrong with them. They feel like they're part of, a community. And so I think that sort of dual socializing, the socializing up with a mentor, someone they can look up to, and then over to people who they like get.
So important. And I thank you for bringing up that point, because, and that's the idea. We talk about educators, but there are obviously more individuals in a learner's life that impact them. And I love that you brought up the idea of a mentor. Thank you for that. Sheila, what do you think? Why is social learning important in your role as an educational specialist and consultant?
Yeah, I would say I think it's important because it really gives you the ability to personalize and individualize a student's learning. And so, when I started at Learnfully, I have two kiddos that I saw independent of one another. And what I realized early on is both of these students were very dependent on their waiting game for me to give them the answer. And so that kind of learned helplessness thing had occurred with them. So when we were looking at having them continue over the summer, I thought, what would help? Because if I'm one-on-one with these kiddos and they've had this learned helplessness and waiting for an adult to give them the answer, because they are professionals at waiting out to have some kind of answer given to them, or hints such that they really aren't doing any of the heavy lifting. So I proposed that during the summer, I brought them together. And so I think it's worked out beautifully, but I think, the message to me was individualizing the social piece is so important, because what is it that is getting in the way of them going further in their learning or taking the initiative to move to that next level? And so I think it takes us being observational and setting the conditions so that the kiddos can be observational and taking the initiative to move to that next level of their own learning. And we've created this, the roles here with the two kids that, we've built relationships so that they can have that comfortable failure and celebrate one another's successes. And to me, if I hadn't created those conditions, I think that their learning over the summer would have looked a lot different. And so I think when a peer is like, wow, high five, knuckle bump, whatever it is very different from your mentor going like, oh, great job. Or your coach saying, oh, that, I love that paragraph sentence. But when a kid says it to a kid or an adult to an adult, it just means so much more. So I think that it's just so important to ensure that you've set up whatever successes you can foresee for your students, and set the conditions for that. And I think that's why it's really important in our role, because you're not just doing it, but you're also setting the conditions for it.
Yep. I love it. And I think it is something that, and we're all virtual coaches and educators too. So I think that a misnomer is that this is not as possible online. And it actually is. I feel the energy exchange by my peers, by my learners being online, and really establishing a sense of community for them to lean upon. And thank you so much for bringing up that point about teacher versus peer too, because it's kind of like that idea of like, your spouse or partner versus your friend giving you some accolades, right? It hits a little different. And so I think that's a great point. Thank you. Okay, so how do you prioritize and incorporate it? It seems like it's naturally embedded, but we do have to be intentional and ensure that it is authentically integrated into everything we do. So Sam, how do you prioritize it? How do you make sure that it's within at all times, everything you're doing?
Dr. Susan Baum, who was my mentor, once said, the goal is to be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. I've always liked that. And the idea is, it's really easy. Like a lot of people are teachers because they love the content, right? And it's really easy to yap a lot. I'm really good at it. I'm trying very hard not to do this right now. So being able to create space for students to then take a concept you've given them and do that gradual release of responsibility, right? Like, okay, I've given you this. Now I'm going to let go a little bit. I want to watch and see how it goes. I'm going to be here for you. As Sheila was saying, like it's a safe space, and we've created a climate where you can, take risks and do these things, but just going to give you room every day, and it's going to be the same, and it's going to be consistent, and it's going to be dependable for you to, put yourself out there and try some things. And if you feel goofy, if you feel silly, let's bring it up, because we probably all do. And, let's adjust and keep going.
Thank you. Because I think it's true. We need to normalize some of this, because when we are in isolation, look, I believe in the power of one-on-one, absolutely. But I think it's a balance in life, just like everything else. And so that having that feel that you're not alone and that we're all experiencing similar things really, like, at least for me, sheds a little bit of anxiety and stress so that I can open my perspective and my cognitive ability to take advantage of what's being delivered. So that's huge.
That was one of the reasons I noticed this big discrepancy in the world, where there were like schools that got it and there were like individual specialists who were really doing great work, but I didn't seem like the great kind of work that was happening with specialists happening for bigger groups. So I thought, like, how can there be a virtual village where we can reach? I see a lot of these kids, especially twice exceptional kids, is like marooned. Like Sheila's idea of kind of throwing someone like a life ring. Don't want to, help people too quickly sometimes, but being able to just pull our kids into a community, is so important. And then socializing can happen and all of that.
Absolutely. They're open to it. They're receptive. Sheila, what do you think?
I think that the way that I prioritize it is always ensuring that there are activities that are created to incorporate the social learning. So I think that it's very easy to fall back on kind of the spray and pray model of just like, let's repeated memorization or whatever it might be, right? Kind of the older techniques that you still will see in some schools, unfortunately. But if you are ensuring that there are activities or project inquiry based that create inquisitive minds, once you get the metacognition and teaching metacognition and getting kids thinking about their thinking, because the sit and get model doesn't create the conditions for them to wonder anything. So if they're not wondering anything, then they're really not observing anything. They're not seeking new learning. They're just waiting to get fed the learning. And so really encouraging, teaching kids how to think. To me, when I was an administrator in a school, that was my number one goal the first 2 years, because it was a real sit and get type worksheets. They were actually using dittos, believe it or not, when I started in their classrooms. And so getting my priority was getting kids to learn how to think, and the adults, to be honest with you. So once the adults and kids had inquisitive minds, really social learning kind of falls to it occurs naturally, because you have, I wonder this, I wonder that, and you have that metacognition going on. And that's how I really strongly prioritize it.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, Sam, how can caregivers, parents, educators, that ecosystem of support, how can they best support learners with social anxiety, right? So we try to alleviate a piece of that, but it doesn't need to be explicitly addressed. So I'm curious how you handle that, virtual or not, how you handle that in your position.
It's so tough to go at this pace because I want to respond to everything Sheila's saying. So, Sheila, you're just a rock star. I love you. What you said is just like really resonating with me. And I want to just say one kind of umbrella comment before I answer this. But when it comes to social, I think one of the key words, which Sheila is really nailing, is authentic, right? If it's authentic problem solving, then we address this chasm that exists between like what the world values and what schools are doing, right? We want like authentic, divergent problem solvers, but we're like doing rote memorization, standardized testing. This punishes failure. This rewards taking risks. And Jess, in the beginning, you talked about like the start with why model. I think back to that famous, iconic Simon Sinek speech where he talks about like the Wright brothers and how it wasn't a normal day if they didn't fail 5 times by dinner, So that's what we need to be doing. To answer your question, how can caregivers and people support our kids with social anxiety? I think what I just did, I hope, take away the fear of failure, that failure is good actually, and that the best and brightest, the people that we worship in history, the Lincolns, the Franklins, whether it's in the present, Greta Thunbergs, right? These are people who go up to bat and strike out all the time, Simone Biles. But what makes them exceptional is not that they do great things, it's that they fail and get back on, or they keep trying. And so creating a space in which we can take away the judgment and include our students in the reflection, not like, oh, I'm stupid, I failed. Hang on, where did you go wrong? How can we change that tomorrow? Let's dust ourselves off and try again, and just collect data, and then if you kind of shift from like right and wrong, this sort of like moral judgment, to let's conduct experiments all the time. Let's have this be a laboratory rather than like a classroom. Then it might change the way in which they sort of associate with what kind of actions are permissible and not.
The perspective. Yeah. And being okay with making mistakes, and that growth mindset that we talk about all of the time is so key. I love the fact that you talk about role modeling and showing examples, not just of historical figures, current day figures, but also of themselves. Like, I love doing that for my own students, my own kids. Is let's talk about a time that this worked for you, that you were successful, or let's talk about just a little tweak that we could make to make it even better next time. And validating that for them and sharing examples from you personally, I think goes a long way too. So thank you for that. All right, Sheila, you're up.
All right. So I think the way that educators can and families can best support learners with social anxiety, definitely modeling the metacognition, like, oh man, I totally mess this up, and modeling mistakes and all of that, because a lot of the anxiety is fear of making mistakes. So I think that's really important. But I think also front loading is really important. My youngest son had school-based anxiety. We had a horrific time getting him to go to school because it was turning into pretty severe depression. And so we, one of the things that really worked for him was YouTube, oddly enough, because if he could watch a YouTube video and watch somebody do it, which is very different than, some other supports that we might have that are maybe doing the math problem, but you don't see the person engaging in the thing. He liked to see a human being engaging in a thing. And when he would want to learn a new skill or something that he was interested in, that's how he would do it. And so he was finding little mini successes in his, not necessarily school life, but in other things, and was a tinkerer and loved to put things together. And so he was able to, get some gratification and confidence building within himself in a space that didn't actually include another person that could see him, but was social in a different way. So that, just as a personal story, worked really well for my son. But I do think that front loading is very helpful in ensuring that they feel comfortable and successful in whatever it is. And then that can get your mind working of, I wonder, because now you have the foundational skills.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have the foundation, you can start wondering things. And the wondering is what's really going to support the social learning, because then you can dialogue with another person about something that a little bit about. If you don't know anything about something, chances are you're going to sit quietly and not engage socially in it. So.
Great. You just struck so many points in my mind about my own children, about my own learners, but that's a great point about modeling virtually and being a low risk, right? Being able to observe other behaviors and building your own confidence and bravado to kind of dive in to that same, what we perceive as risks. My son watching somebody play Roblox, and then them joining, he goes on FaceTime all the time with his friends now and does the same game because he feels so confident comparing himself and being able to learn from others. Not comparing in a bad way, not a competitive way, just being able to associate. So there's a lot of positivity that comes from some of these virtual platforms. So I appreciate you stating that, and removing some of the variables, like you said, controlling the conditions, right? So if you know that your class or your learner in particular gets anxious by not knowing what's going to happen that day, you write the schedule on the board. Those kind of like small tweaks can reduce the anxiety and then open up to the world of possibilities when it comes to social learning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's close out the panel discussion with what's one tip. I know it's so hard, I get it, but what's one tip about social learning that you would like to offer the audience that you have not already offered? Sam, the mic is yours.
I would say that let go of what you think socializing and schooling look like. I think it's changing. It would be a disservice to the fact that we just had a disruptive pandemic to then just say like, okay, everyone back on the ship. Things have changed. Your kids aren't the same. We're not the same. Society's not the same. And I think, Sir Ken Robinson once said, like, everyone's had an education and everyone has an opinion. Try to check yours, I would say. It's important to be able to say that, like, look, Discord may be different from going to the sock hop, times are different and students may be connecting different ways. I think it's important that we just keep an open mind and create space for our students to consistently go where it feels good and then invest in that. Can we create opportunities for them to do what they love more, regardless of how we think? If you told my dad, like, hey, your son's going to go drop out of his teaching job and he's going to start a virtual school, like, he'd be like, there's no such thing, but there is now. And, the content creation is a thing, being a cryptocurrency miner or developer, like, things are changing all around us. So it's important that we take the same approach with socializing and check ourselves a little bit.
Brilliant. Evolve with the times, keep an open mind. So important. Sheila, what are some closing thoughts?
I would say meet your learner where they are. Not where you want them to be, not where you're perceiving them, not what you think they should be doing. Just meet them, whatever it is, meet them where they are in that moment, and ask questions. The metacognition, I don't think that we can, I know that's not a new one that we've talked about it, but really teaching them how to ask questions, teaching them how to wonder about things, teaching them how to think is more important than anything we can ever teach our kids. So if, teach them to be inquisitive, then the rest will fall into place. And I think that's, could never be underestimated.
Empower them to learn how they learn best and then advocate for that is I think very, very, it's critical. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's imperative to their success, and teaching them how to problem solve, conceptualize, think critically, really employ those higher order thinking skills and learn how they learn. I think that's key. So
And I
thank you
think
for that.
even Albert Einstein, I think, was the one that said imagination is more important than education, because in truth, if we're wondering and curious, we're going to educate ourselves or one another. So it's all about imagination and wonder.
I love it. How sweet. Well, thank you both for joining us. I greatly, greatly appreciate your time, your insight, your expertise. I hope that our audience can continue to hear from both of you. I have absolutely loved interacting with both of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to turn a little bit to Learnfully services. So please feel free. I know, Sam, if you have to come in and out, it's absolutely fine. We're grateful for your time.
Thanks
So
for having me.
Learnfully, absolutely, of course, anytime. So Learnfully's process is we start with a Spark Learning Assessment and a caregiver questionnaire. We want to be able to see your learner as you see them, but as they see themselves, right? As we talk about how important that is, we want to ensure that we give room, space, and credibility to observations that you may have about how they learn best, areas of needs, strengths, interests. And then based on the Spark Learner Assessment, based on the caregiver questionnaire, we then have a consultation, a readout, a report, debrief, if you will, where we talk through our findings. We highlight their strengths. We want to bolster and engage them through interests. That is very important. It's more important to us even than some of the remedial tasks. We have to start there. And then we make recommendations, of course, beyond rapport building and connectivity that really get to the crux of what will allow them to be more successful, take those risks, think conceptually, imagine, be wondrous, right? Be curious. So we talk about the learner profile, the recommendations, and then based on all of that information, the interests, strengths, personality, needs, we match them to an educational specialist who has certification and training to boot. Our services are, we start with educational therapy, if that's what's warranted, if a learner needs remediation or enrichment that requires that evidence-based, research-validated, multi-sensory piece. We also utilize those techniques in our executive functioning coaching, in our academic tutoring, which is more of a generalization approach to those foundational programs. And then we do teach study skills and test prep. So that's important to us to help coach a learner. We can set the foundation, make sure it's strong for them to stand upon, but we want to also hold their hand a little bit towards they reach a level of autonomy and independence, feel good about their ability to not just advocate for themselves, but really execute upon what's being asked of them. We have flexible formats. We want to do what's in the best interest of every single learner, individually and personalize that support. So we can see learners online, in person, one-on-one, if that's how they respond best at first, but then we can always transition into a pair format like Sheila mentioned, small groups. We have executive functioning classes, which is more than 5 students in a group. And we can also coach the parent on how to support their learner in between sessions to, again, maintain that momentum and ensure that they're really expediting progress as a whole. I'm going to check our chat just to see if we have some questions we can answer. I know Sam had to jump. There's questions about the replay will be available. We will share this recording with you. We'll send an email out later today or tomorrow that has the replay for you. And again, you can always reach out as questions arise as you watch the recording. And we'll also share, I know there's a question here about how you can get in touch with the panelists, and it will share their information in that follow-up email. Since you registered, you will receive the link to the recording, as well as contact information and helpful resources that support everything that we mentioned today. Just make sure all the questions. All right, I think we answered all the questions. Thank you all so much for joining us. Feel free to reach out to our email, call or text us, follow us on socials. Make sure you like our videos and subscribe to our platforms. We're here for you. We're here to build a community. And we're so thankful that we're here to support you. So appreciate you coming. And next month, we'll talk about ways that we can ease back into the school year and set your learner up for success. Hope to see you then. Thanks so much. Bye.